Hello, Internet. Welcome to Houses and Hobbits, a Boise Bros production. I'm your host, Burke. This is Alex.
Hi.
And this is Ryan.
Hello.
Hobbits and Houses, or Houses and Hobbits, whichever you prefer, is a comparison of Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones on various different subjects, depending on how they handle it in their worlds. This can cover the movies, the books, the TV shows, all the above. Today, we're going to be discussing religion in both worlds and how each of them deals with it. So, shall we begin?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, how familiar are you with how Lord of the Rings is, religion-wise?
Well, I definitely think that, the elves, like each of the races seem to have like kind of their own type of beliefs, religions. It's not, I feel like, it's covered as much in the actual movies as it probably is in the books. But I feel like, it's really based in that kind of racial culture about what they believe, what comes after, what their life is like for, like everything like within that.
Mm-hmm. So, and obviously, like, you only watch the movies, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So, basically the way it works, and obviously it doesn't talk about it at all, like, in the movies, truly.
Yeah,
one of the things that is apparent in Lord of the Rings, when you read, like, the Silmarillion and all the other excess works that Tolkien wrote, there is actually a full-on creation story that is very heavily based off of biblical creation, honestly,
and is that
because Tolkien was a devout Catholic.
That's what I was at. Okay, good.
So the way it goes is that there is the creator god. His name is Eru Ilúvatar in their mythos. And basically, when there was nothing, there was the void, he began this song of creation, as it's called, where he created the Einar, which were basically the angels, for lack of a better word. And they all weaved this web of this song of creation together and made Arda, which is the world that Middle-earth is on.
Oh, that's a lot of new information.
And like if you watch the movies, you didn't get that. Like, you might get little tidbits of, like, the Valar, which is part of the Einar. That's one of their names. You have the Valar and the Maiar.
And so this is canon as far as Tolkien is concerned?
Yes,
all canon.
All of this is canon. So, and like, once we get to more like Game of Thrones related stuff, there's a lot more difference in the religions of that universe, whereas Tolkien was very straightforward with his. It's very, that this is the truth. The only opposite religion that I could find in my research was, so we'll continue the story here. Basically, they have their version of Lucifer for our biblical interpretation. His name was Melkor, who most fans of Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion will later know as Morgoth. And he is the big bad behind Sauron.
Okay, see, I thought I recognized that name.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so he was basically, to them, what Lucifer was to us, became Satan.
Gotcha.
And so he was discordant. He was the strongest and smartest of all the other Valar. And eventually he created, orcs, Balrogs, or like the Balrogs were already created, and he seduced them over to his side.
Because if there was ever, an entity that was from like a demonic place or like a hellish place, the Balrog.
Oh, absolutely! A creature of shadow and fire.
Yeah.
Oh,
most definitely.
Dragging Dumbledore down the depths.
So,
of
and if I recall, based on my research, Morgoth, I think, actually created the dragons.
Was like, okay.
He literally created them himself. And then accounts can differ on this one. It's never fully discussed. The only hint of it we get in the movies was Sauron makes Lurtz, the Uruk-hai, and he has that conversation with him. He says, "Oh, do you know how the orc came to be? They were elves once." And that's the theory most of them have. It could have been elves, could have been men that Morgoth took and he corrupted into orcs, essentially. But with that, you have a worship of Morgoth that is also present, and we'll get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
Any question?
Well, one thing that's a little contrary to what, Alex, you were saying is you thought there were multiple religions.
Right.
Really, in Lord of the Rings, there's one religion.
Mm-hmm. So all the races follow
like
that?
Literally, pretty much.
All of the races follow the one religion. They're just on different sides of the story.
Yeah.
So on one half, people are worshiping the good god. On the other half, you have people worshiping the bad god. just like how we have it in our own biblical stories for Catholicism, Christianity.
So are like dwarves, elves, and like humans all kind of on this?
So I actually wanted to
side?
get to that portion right now.
Okay.
So in the story of creation for them, the two that were made by, so you have all of his angels, and he basically made them create their own beings, like their own living creatures. One of them created the Ents, one of them created the dwarves, and then the two that were made by Eru himself were the elves and men.
Okay.
And hobbits are considered a subset of men.
Right.
The dwarves, however, are called the adoptive children of Eru because the Einar that made them wasn't able to give them true life. Like, he made them, and then when Eru found out that he was making them, he commanded that they be destroyed, and then before he was about to destroy them, the dwarves cried out in suffer, like they were very afraid of being destroyed, and that was when that particular one, and I forget his name, but he knew that Eru had actually given life to them, really. And so they're considered the adopted children of Eru.
Okay.
So, but his two favorites were the ones he created personally were elves and men, and of those two, men were his favorite. Very similar to Christianity, where.
So where do orcs break off from elves? Because they were once elves, right? Orcs were.
That, like I said, that's kind of the running theory. Is that they were elves. There's not fully confirmation. That's just what most scholars who've studied all the works believe, and then obviously they worked that into Peter Jackson's interpretation.
Right. So there's not like one answer then, like kind of where orcs
on the orcs
came from?
not necessarily.
So it wasn't like they were corrupted by like the bad version of this world's
No,
thing.
the only thing we know is that it was Morgoth who made them.
Okay.
Like
So
that,
okay.
It is possible that he literally just made them, or it's possible that he captured elves and men and turned them into orcs.
Gotcha. Cool.
So I've not seen full confirmation of that. It's possible either way.
But it's just, it's something. Something happened. There was a branch off.
Exactly.
There's nothing canon written as to why.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I mean, I didn't know they all believed. They were on like two
And,
sides.
and,
of the
and it's
whole
not even necessarily
paradigm.
that they all believe it. It's just kind of they all go about living their lives as they so desire. The thing with the elves is that they have the option to sail to the Undying Lands,
Right.
which for them is that but one of the reasons that it talks about men being the favored of Eru is because, and it's so interesting to me that they talk about this, he gave them the ability to die. And it's called the gift of Eru, is the fact that they don't live forever and that they can
This
make...
is
This is men.
Oh, this is men.
This is men.
Okay.
And it's the fact that they can choose their own fates. They can make their own destiny while they live.
Whereas elves...
they're just kind of tied to the nature of the world. That's one of the main reasons, especially if you remember in the movies, the elves are just so solemn about everything. And the reason that is, and this kind of goes into something I wanted to talk about at a later time, but with the elves, they had their rings of power, their three rings of power. Right. And the elven lords who had those rings basically used those rings to preserve that which they held most dear, which was their realm. Like, so, and that's why Rivendell and Lothlorien and all Mirkwood,
for
all these elven realms had been such amazing places with places of power for a long time. But the worst thing about it is because of the creation of the One Ring, those rings are tied to the power of the One.
Right.
And so in destroying it, yes, they achieve victory over Sauron.
But all those places
begin to diminish. And that's why the elves... It's not even that's why they had to leave. That's just why they're so solemn, because it means that their time is basically coming to an end because they elongated it for so long through the power of their rings.
And thus they got on the boats and sailed. Gotcha. Okay.
So, yeah.
That's a lot.
It's very detailed.
It's very detailed.
So how does that stack up against the Game of Thrones religion?
So with Game of Thrones, and so...
That's where it's a little different.
It's very different.
Game of Thrones doesn't have one. They have one.
It has multiple, and it is not afraid to admit that none of them could be true, or all of them could be true.
Okay. All right.
That's
so like
that's,
more agnosticism versus like a one.
Oh, absolutely. George R. R. Martin is agnostic atheist, but he was born and raised a Catholic, I believe.
Oh, similar to Tolkien then.
Similar. And so one of the faiths in Game of Thrones, known as the Faith of the Seven, is very reminiscent of Catholicism, including, the Faith of the Seven it's similar to how the Trinity works for Christianity.
Right.
It's one God with 7 aspects that represent bits and pieces of life, and take over whenever you want on that aspect.
It's just he almost made his religions, George R. R. Martin, to be a little bit more like our real world. So we don't have one religion that everyone in the world worships.
Right.
Obviously, it's a little different. And so he wanted to leave that open to interpretation to the fans. Whereas Tolkien was pretty much like, hey, this is how it is. I've already created the religion for you. You know this is true. George R. R. Martin, he was going more of a religion as a way to define the characters. Mm-hmm. So based on the beliefs of these characters, you kind of get a better understanding of what they
Which you get more of the nuance in a world like A Song of Ice and Fire because of that. You don't have religious wars per se in Lord of the Rings, whereas you have people literally killing each other over whether or not they believe in the Lord of Light or the Seven or the many-faced God, whatever that may be.
So it doesn't all come down to like the throne itself. Do you have
there's plenty of infighting for other things besides just the throne.
Okay.
Yeah, so the world itself is more developed in a way where there are people that can branch off. Mm-hmm. So more choice for the characters. You don't have to make a hobbit, and the hobbit has to go about life in one way, or an elf that has to go about life in one way. Pretty much everyone's on an even playing field.
Right.
In the
and how they kind of develop is just based on kind of like their world experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah. For example, just a couple of characters that... And I literally had forgotten about this point, but you have the character of Ned Stark, and you have his wife, Catelyn. Ned is raised in the North, which is very much of the religion of the old gods, which the old gods literally are just a bunch of nameless, faceless gods. The only thing that ever indicates like what they could be in is the weirwood trees, the white with red-leaved trees that are all over, and they have the faces that are carved into them.
Okay. More gods of nature.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Whereas Catelyn Stark was raised in the South before she married Ned, and the South very much had more of the Faith of the Seven. So she was raised with that one god with several aspects, all that stuff. And you do get a little bit of that sense of she always feels like a bit of an outsider when in the North, especially when she goes to a place of worship, which is near a weirwood tree.
Gotcha.
Because Ned would always, especially in the show, he would be found shining his sword ice near one of the weirwood trees. And she literally says, like, I've always felt like an outsider here. And it's so interesting because that's like it's an aspect of these characters that you kind of delve more into.
So I have a question. So generally when you have like faiths in different like fantasy sort of settings, you kind of have signs that something is more real or not. Do we come across any of those where it's like the gods are speaking
so you come
characters?
Across, and I wanted to save this for like our magic episode, but you come across these miracles that do happen within Game of Thrones. Whether or not they're done by any particular god is unknown. And in one of his interviews, I believe, George is talking about Melisandre, who is a follower of the Lord of Light.
Okay.
And she looks into the flames and she sees visions all the time, and she can do these signs and wonders that, help people follow her or follow whoever she decides to put up on a pedestal. She puts up a particular person that she wants as the king for quite some time in both the books and the show.
And she uses a number of magic abilities that she claims
are from the Lord of Light. And Martin is credited as, because many fans have obviously said, well, isn't that clear indication that the Lord of Light is the true God in this reality?
Or at least exists.
And at least exists. And he says, well, is it the Lord of Light, or is it the drowned God, letting her see something, or is it the Seven, or is it the many-faced God?
So she has to interpret her abilities through her own perception of
exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The other character who shows a lot of abilities would probably be Bran.
Yeah.
He's the kid that is crippled in
Right.
a wheelchair.
And he has like this vision thing, right?
Yeah, he has visions. He's able to go into different people or animals in order to control them. And that power is very much tied to the old gods. So you have powers from both sets of these religions. And yeah, you don't know which one is true and which one is false because multiple people have powers and they claim they got it from different entities.
Right. Minor tangent, but like in D&D you see different classes like clerics versus like warlocks, right? They can have similar abilities, but they come from different places. So what basically you're saying is within Game of Thrones, all these people, or some people have abilities, and they can claim it comes from this or that, but there's no
But they
canon
don't
answer.
actually truly know. There is no canon answer that we know of. He might answer the question for the ending. I think that would be a disservice to
Right.
everything he's put into his series thus
I
far.
definitely feel like something
Because
unsaid.
it's not that I prefer either one. I love both of these universes, but I've always enjoyed the fact that you have that nuance in Game of Thrones,
mystery,
in
right.
Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah, there's this mystery of, and I mean, if you dig into a lot of the other stuff, you have the World of Ice and Fire, which is his big compendium of all these other little things. It talks about some of these other places that are out in the mysterious parts of the world that we don't know about. And like he puts references to like Cthulhu mythos in there.
Oh,
So,
really?
like legitimately,
The drowned
the
god.
drowned god is very Cthulhu-esque. What is
Oh.
dead may never die is their
Do you think he pulled directly, or is it more like an Easter egg, or is it just sort of his own?
It's his own. Some of it's Easter eggy. Like I know some of the towns that he put out in like the really far reaches that we're never actually going to go to, but he did
Right.
it to fill out the map.
Gotcha.
He put them as references to like some of these other things, like Bone Town and Kadath was one of them, and I know that that's in a
They have like
Lovecraft
these,
story.
so you could make references,
Yeah,
but you're also this
absolutely.
also could be all his own mind.
and there's a city full of greasy black stone. It's
Yeah.
called Yeen, where people went there, and it was kind of like a Roanoke thing for our
Oh, sure,
us,
sure, on the East
where
Coast.
people tried to go and settle in Yeen, and in a month they were all gone. Nobody knows where they went, and it's fascinating. I love
Yeah,
that
it
kind of stuff.
seems very much tied to our own mythos in our own world.
Right.
Where you as a reader, you can connect with certain religions.
Right.
And you can kind of be drawn towards one or the other, just as the characters in the world are as well.
Yeah, that's really kind of cool to parallel there, because you can be like, oh, this is the character that's right, I totally believe in this, while another person who reads the exact same chapter and be like, oh no, this is a completely different thing, it's reminiscent of this god or this set of beliefs.
Like
Exactly.
if I had to like forgo nuance, and if I were in the Game of Thrones world, based on the things I know about it, obviously I'd probably be drawn more to like the Lord of Light or the old gods. Whereas the Seven, like legitimately, in all of the stuff I've read and seen, I don't feel like there's ever any evidence
Nope.
that like the Seven could have ever been like a real thing.
Would you say they all have their own pros and cons?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
So
100%.
there's not
Like
one
the
that's
Lord,
like, this
the Lord
one's-
of Light demands that you burn people to sacrifice to him.
The drowned god.
The drowned god demands
Drown
that you
people.
drown yourself, and if he finds favor with you, then he'll resurrect you to life.
So I don't want to jump on like your future topic of like magic or
No.
anything, but I know that, spoiler alert, obviously, we're discussing huge worlds and we're going to talk about specific things in them. Something happens to the main Stark, the guy on the Night Watch, the guy all the
Jon Snow.
Jon Snow. That's right. He dies,
He's
right?
killed.
Then he comes back.
Yep.
And why?
Supposedly because of the
Lord of
power
Light.
of the Lord of Light. Because it's Melisandre who's there at the time that he gets stabbed, and then he's dead for a day or two. And then she basically goes and she does her whatever, and she brings him back.
Okay. So, but anyone watching that or reading that can be like, oh, it's something else.
Well, and
It's very much
it's
implied in the
very
show
much
that it
im-
was her.
okay.
In the books, I mean...
Well, first off, in the books, we literally haven't even gotten to the point where Jon Snow is either brought back or still dead.
Right.
Yeah,
For all
the
those-
books are way behind the
The
Yeah.
series.
books are way behind the series at this point.
And that's where it's tough, because Martin could go either way. He could decide, you know what?
One of the big theories, especially because the last words that Jon says before he succumbs basically to his injuries is he calls out for his direwolf ghost. Now, in the books, all of the Stark children have some sort of warging ability. All of them. Like Bran, Arya, even Jon, like he wargs into his direwolf sometimes. So
Wargs.
so that's the
Possessor
power. That's the
animal.
power that Bran has.
Jumps into other
Yep.
He
beings.
jumps into other beings. So
It's an old
the,
god.
The theory is that Jon will warg into Ghost, live in Ghost until Melisandre can fix his body, and then he'll warg back.
Huh.
That's the theory. So that way he doesn't actually die,
Right.
because his spirit will be in his dog, his wolf.
So when he did die, was he in?
No. In the show, he was dead.
Okay.
Like, they literally asked him, what did you see on the other side? I saw nothing. There was nothing.
And that's where they're
And, like,
going
that's the other
completely
reason-
different branches.
And that's the other reason, like, it's more vague, even in the show, because some of the religions will talk about, with the drowned god religion, you'll go down to his watery holes and you'll feast with him for eternity, yada yada. The seven actually has heaven, and you'll awaken in the next life, and that's why they carve the little eyes on the stones, all these things. But Jon, when he dies, there's nothing.
Right.
There's nothing, and he remembers that there was nothing.
But again, it's a great parallel because in our real world, we have people with these great stories of when they had near-death experience. And those people are like, there was nothing, right? And it's just like,
Who knows?
Who knows?
Yep.
Who knows?
That's cool. That's really sick, actually.
So, yeah.
So, would you say now you've read both the books and you've seen the show, right?
I've read everything in Lord of the Rings besides the Silmarillion. I'm starting to slowly try to read more.
Yeah.
It's just there's a lot.
How much of A Song of Ice and Fire did you actually read all of?
Song of Ice and Fire I read all the way through.
Oh, nice.
So I am completely caught up with Game of Thrones, and I finished the show. I do believe that Martin is going to be going a completely different route with his book series than the show actually went.
Yeah,
which I'm happy about. Personally,
I was going to say, it really sucks that the creators of Game of Thrones had a stroke and died before they could finish the series, because season 7 left us on a really good cliffhanger.
Yeah,
So
would have been great.
So here's hoping that Martin will figure it out, because we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Showrunners killed the series.
I guess the series itself
Anyway.
can't really call itself canon because he's the one writing the books and he isn't even there.
Precisely.
Exactly.
So,
Because
Now there is
and
that theory.
all jokes aside, he told them how he wanted to end it, but I don't think he gave them the full details.
Right.
So obviously they just kind of made things happen to get to that ending. I believe that he's a competent enough writer that he will make that all make sense in the next 2 books. If he ever completes them, I have no idea.
The showrunners kind of ran with whatever ideas they wanted
Right.
to end to his end goal that he proclaimed. With how the fan reception was with the show, who's to say Martin will stick with the same exact story?
I think he will. I also think one of the main reasons he didn't release the books as the series was being made is you have that competition almost of why would I read the books when there's a perfectly good TV show I can watch, and I just feel like it would have driven the sales of his books down, whereas if he releases them now that the show's over, people who want the actual canon ending, for lack of a better term, will flock to those.
It's interesting because we'll get to see whether he follows that storyline.
Because if he changes the storyline,
Right.
I think it'll be the greatest troll ever. Because I would almost think that he would have just told them an ending and just wanted to see how they would have done
100%.
And writers generally have multiple endings that they
Yeah,
can kind of go
that
through.
they
So he
can
could have just
kinda
thrown
think
one
of.
that he's like, maybe that's what I'll do, and then he's just, as he sees the reception, he's like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's all up in the air.
Right.
Now, and we don't even know what the showrunners and Martin talked about.
No.
So,
Legitimately, the one thing we know for a fact was talked about was the question of who is Jon Snow's mother.
Right.
and so that's it.
That was the one thing that we know. That story has been told a million times over, that they answered correctly, and that's when he gave them the blessing to make the show. Because he was notorious for saying, I don't think this could ever be turned into a movie or a TV show.
Right. So going back to the prompt a little bit, Ryan, would you say that there's more religious overtones, like the faith of Game of Thrones, in the books, or more in the show? Or
More
would
in
you
the
say,
books.
okay,
Much more in the books.
So it
The show definitely leaves it more to interpretation. They can only fit so much into each episode. So a lot of the times when they are going off story to kind of discuss the religion in the books, They definitely shorten that up to be like a sentence or two in the shows.
Right.
Which, I mean, it makes sense. They can't fit everything
And I mean,
in.
one of the things that they did for the show, and I sent Ryan this video last night, was on the special features. I think it was for mostly Blu-ray editions of the show. They had extra little excerpts that were actually narrated by the characters, like they narrated as themselves, like their characters.
Yep.
Which kind of delve more into the lore, and one of the ones I sent him was just the ones that throughout the series they had it on religion, and it talked about all these different ones.
Okay. So it's in there. Obviously, you have to look for it.
You have to look for it. In the books, it's a lot more front and center.
Right,
Yeah.
sure. Really tough hardball for you, Burke. I think you'll enjoy it, though, so we talked about magic, and that's going to be a different topic. But Return of the King.
Yep.
You got the ghost army that are cursed, right?
Yep.
What's going on there?
So basically, what are we just talking about, like
So,
religiously or magically?
Well, I guess religiously, because you would assume people that died would go to one of the two
So
places,
I don't.
right?
So here's the thing, and it's been a while since I've read Return of the King. The Army of the Dead does not actually come to Minas Tirith.
Okay.
They are only used for one aspect. If I recall, it was to acquire the ships that they eventually did
that was
sail.
a liberty? Like, they took liberty and made the army come
no, there's
to...
plenty of liberties that they
That's
took.
a sick
No, and
siege.
we'll talk about those
Okay,
at some point.
all right.
But that was one of the liberties that they took.
Oh, that's I'm sad that wasn't in the
which
books.
is really cool because in the books he goes and gathers another force from a subsidiary of Gondor, basically, and brings them.
Oh, okay, so
to
that's
fight
why
the-
they win. They didn't use the Ghost Army to win in the books. They just
nope,
had
nope.
another army.
No, and
They
I mean,
used it to get
the
the
ghost
ships.
the Ghost Army existed.
Okay.
It just wasn't at the battle.
They
of
just
Minas
go
Tirith.
murder like all of them.
No, they don't go and do that.
And to explain religion-wise,
Yeah.
to kind
Yeah,
of back
please.
up on your question, because man was given the choice in their lives, they're not stuck to one path. That would explain why they were able to be cursed. So if they have this, if the Game of Thrones or if the Lord of the Rings religion is to be, taken literally, if man was his favorite because he gave them the choice of life, being cursed and being forced to an afterlife makes sense. Like if they're like now if elves and
No, and obviously,
everyone else,
like one of the things, especially in the movie portrayal of it, the main thing is that they are held until the heir of Isildur releases them. And obviously, it's a great relief for them.
Yeah.
It's like, let us go. Let us be at peace. We've been living this living hell,
Right,
this
sure.
living death
Yeah.
for thousands of years at that point. It had been about 3,000 years that they had been
a rough
cursed
time.
like that.
Yeah.
But so basically what happened there, though, is if I recall, they made an oath to Isildur or to Elendil, his father, that they would come and fight for Gondor when the time came. And I don't know if it was for the Last Alliance, which is why I'm saying it could have been to Elendil that they made this vow, and maybe Isildur followed up and cursed them after the battle was over. Or it could have been a later battle before Isildur was killed after trying to take the ring back to Gondor.
But the curse itself would be magic.
The curse
right?
itself was a magical curse.
it has nothing to do with religion.
It didn't really have anything to do with
So it wasn't the
religion.
gods cursing them, it was man with
It
magic.
might. I don't know what the full. I believe it more to be magic or like.
Religion-wise, it makes sense why they were cursed because
Yes.
they have the choice of life. But it was
But I don't
most
believe
likely
it
a
was
magic.
like Isildur said the words, "Oh, by Eru Iluvatar, I curse you.
Right.
You didn't come to our aid." All these things. I don't think it had anything to do with that particularly.
It wouldn't be like a river Styx thing, right?
No.
Going into Greek
No.
mythology, there's a river. You make a.
But also, I will also counter my point that I just made, because here's the thing with Isildur and Elendil in particular, they were the last of the Númenóreans, which Númenor was an island out in the midst between the Undying Lands and Middle-earth. And it was where, like, the most powerful, the Dunedain, the ones who were blessed with, like, the longest life of all men, that's where they came from. And here's the funny thing about Númenor, and this is where it kind of ties into the religious aspect of it. So Númenor came in the Second Age and helped push Sauron back when he was trying to take over all of Middle-earth. And because of that, obviously Numenor became Sauron's like most hated enemy.
Right.
Absolutely, he wanted to destroy them. And so when they came again for another one of his schemes, he allowed himself to be captured. Sauron went to Numenor, and in his time being imprisoned, he managed to get out, and he pulled a Jafar, and he became the king's advisor.
Oh.
And he started persuading his people, first off, to the worship of Morgoth, and then he did he told them to do the one thing that the men were not allowed to do. He said, "You are the favorite of Iluvatar. Why don't you sail west and go to the Undying Lands? Why don't you take immortality for yourself?" And that is when Iluvatar himself, there's very few times of him intervening in the after everything's done. He destroyed Numenor. And only those who were faithful to him, basically Elendil, Isildur, they sailed to Middle-earth and they founded Arnor and Gondor.
So
it is possible that if Isildur still like absolutely held to that, he could have also cursed the dead men of Dunharrow with that. So there is that possibility.
There's so much.
There's a lot.
There's so much.
Yeah.
What a word.
No.
It's insane.
I would say Lord of the Rings is easier to understand because it is all canon religion,
Right.
where it's like there's one. It is easier to go through and learn the history of it because you're learning it in real time almost, where it's like, okay, this definitely happened in this age.
And in the lore, the obviously we know Tolkien's the one writing this, but in the lore of his world, these things are written down a lot better. There's a lot more of this history that's actually recorded and recorded properly, and it's remembered.
So people know. It's not like up to interpretation.
Game of Thrones, and you have a lot of people within the universe who it's like they don't even know if the Long Night ever happened, if the White Walkers were ever even a real thing. They have stories of it, but they don't know. Oh, well, maybe these are just exaggerated. Maybe there was just an eclipse that lasted for, a few years or something like that. Like, they will make up all these excuses as to why these things might not have actually happened.
Which is very similar to our world.
Exactly.
People are constantly trying to find
What's
counters.
the truth? History is written by the victors. That's something we understand very well.
Who's the head Ice Walker? I'm trying to remember the.
In the show, he's called the Night King.
Night King.
In the books, there was a Night's King, but he's not a White Walker.
Gotcha.
He may have made sacrifices to the White Walkers, but he's not a White Walker.
Okay, so
Again, show taking liberties.
Show liberties, also making a really big bat.
So the Night King.
Yeah.
Right. So he's got a whole lot of backstory of like where he came from.
Mostly related to the old gods, yes.
Yes.
Right. And
so,
but again, it could have been other ones, or he's based in their
it
lore.
could have been other ones, but is the answer the show gives us for his particular creation is the children of the forest had him tied to a weirwood tree, and they basically made a blood sacrifice of stabbing him with a piece of obsidian into his heart.
Really sick scene, by the way.
It's a really sick scene.
Very cool scene.
And that's how he became the first White Walker.
And they messed up, right? Because he wasn't happy when he came
He was
out.
basically a Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
Because they initially made him to fight the first men.
Because the first men were threatening them.
They were cutting down the weirwood trees, they were burning the weirwood trees. Which were
and it was like kind of like part of their faith that the weirwood trees stay alive?
So for the
They
children
were
of the
tied.
forest, the children of the forest were literally like the worshippers of the old gods before the first men. And then you eventually have the pact between them where they stopped hostilities, and then the first men adopted the old gods.
Gotcha.
And then you have a different sect of men called the Andals, and they sailed to Westeros, and then they founded the Faith of the Seven. And then they managed to conquer every kingdom that there was of the first men except the North, and that's why the North is still adherent to the old gods.
Okay.
So the religion in Game of Thrones, think of it like the world, every part of the world has their own style.
Right.
Has their own histories, their own backstories, their own gods.
Set of beliefs where they come from.
Set of belief. Whereas Tolkien goes all the way back to the creation of the world,
Gotcha.
which explains why there is
And
only
he
one
just
religion.
basically has all of the history recorded up to that point, whereas Martin just kind of plops us in the middle and then
Right.
gives us all these different backstories and belief systems onto why we're at this point in history.
Tolkien, he brought, so he's got this, he's simple, staunch, this is the faith of the universe, whereas...
Or just literally, it's not even necessarily about faith, this is the universe.
There's no
faith.
the universe.
It's not. They don't consider it faith. They
Right.
consider it history.
Right, history. So, and then Martin, he sort of has... How do you put this? Like, every history has their own origins, and that's where that group's faith comes
Absolutely.
from.
It's sort
and
of
then
like...
they clash to see who wins out.
It's
just like our
yeah,
world.
it's exactly like our world where, biblical text talks about a flood. There's other texts like Gilgamesh
Right.
talks about a great flood that covered the entire
Right, things
earth.
that are similar, but also things that are very different.
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's... And that's just one aspect of these entire universes, which is so wild.
I mean, that's why this was the first thing that really popped up in my head when I was researching, like, hey, what kind of stuff can I make for Houses and Hobbits? Religion honestly popped up to me first, just because there's so much depth in Martin's world, and then when you actually look at the lore of Tolkien's histories, basically, it's like, holy cow.
Now,
Yeah.
Remind me, Tolkien, he created like extra works around all this stuff.
Yeah.
Not all of this
So-
is based in stories of an adventure and a journey and a hero.
So the Silmarillion really goes into detail of the history, the lore,
Right.
the religion, if you will,
Yeah.
where it began, and that's where me just starting to read the Silmarillion stories, the collection of stories. You really only get tidbits of it in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and then going to the Silmarillion, which was produced afterwards, after Lord of the Rings had already been released, after The Hobbit had already been released. That's when the religion and the lore really started to be kind of fleshed out.
And so Martin, he's never done... He's still writing the story,
Yes.
obviously.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have extra books dedicated to this faith, that faith, the other one.
He has extra books dedicated to like some of the stories he made, like especially the Targaryen dynasty. He goes into a lot more detail about the kings and like their struggles. And he might cover more of the religion in those. I haven't actually read those subsidiaries.
Okay.
But it's absolutely possible he does go into more detail
I mean, he has
in
a
those.
way to kind of do it.
Exactly.
Yeah, Tolkien has two generations, him and his son,
Right.
who produced all of this. Well, obviously, it was mostly Tolkien, and then his son kind of used his notes to add to it. George R. R. Martin, if you consider it time-wise, he's just getting started.
Right.
If he had a kid and decided to take up the mantle and
He's
continue,
amazed how quickly some writers write, because he takes his time, but also he writes
Which is
really...
it's not a bad thing
No.
that he takes his time. I'm okay with writers taking their time because
you get a better story.
you get a better story. That's one of the best things about Tolkien is like he wrote out this really expansive universe. Even you, who consider yourself a mild fan, like you're amazed by some of the stuff that we just talked about.
Yeah, because I have no clue.
Yeah, the
And
movies.
I mean, even I was
don't even
amazed
go
when I
through.
was researching some of this.
And the movies
and the
themselves
movies are
are so long.
fantastic already with all the stuff that they jam in there. That they don't even have time to jam in, the first and second age of the world.
You would get an essential Marvel universe of films if you were to try to
Absolutely.
flesh out everything.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right, and you already have 6 films in the Lord of the Rings series, right? The Journey
The
of
3
Hobbit,
Hobbits and The Lord of the Rings.
and then Martin has 7 seasons for? Is it 7
It's 8
8
seasons.
seasons of the show.
8 seasons of the show.
And hopefully 7 books. He's only got 5 books so far.
By the way, is that confirmed that they're doing another thing, or is that not on the
Well,
table anymore?
so far, another series, you mean?
Yeah, I thought they were going to go into the history.
So
more.
there was going to be a
Spin-off.
there was actually 2 that I know were confirmed. One got canceled, but it was going to go back to the White Walkers, to their origins and that the first Long Night and all this stuff. But the one that's currently in production, I want to say House of the Dragon is what it's
I
called.
believe it's about the Targaryens.
Yes, basically a spin-off about the Targaryens.
Which would be
that's,
great.
That's 300 years of history you can
Now,
get out of that.
I obviously don't have the answer to this, but would you assume that Martin's helping create that?
He
Or
better
is
be.
that
He
something-
better be.
Because
After what happened with
Like,
Game of Thrones, I would
as
imagine.
As soon as his hand was like gone from the series, it started going downhill. And I'm not going to say that season 5 through 7 were perfect, but I would really like him to have somewhat of a hand.
Right. But like he's still trying to write the main series.
Exactly. That's where it's tough.
No, like that's the tough.
He's trying to write his series, which he dedicates pretty much his whole life to.
Right.
For him to take a break from that to help produce
to
the show,
history.
It's a
Yeah.
Well, that's our two evils.
Yeah.
You either wait longer for the book or you wait longer
You could try to
for
do
the
both,
show.
but it's probably not going to be as good.
Exactly.
He has to be surface level, and you can't really go deep into the history like you want to.
Whereas with Lord of the Rings,
It's
you have it all there. If they
it's
wanted to
done.
make shows or
Right.
they wanted to make movies for it, it's already done.
Which, I mean, some of the stories that you find in that, they're amazing.
When was the
Like
last...
they're almost one of them is actually very Martin-esque in how horrible it is.
horrible.
Dark.
Like dark.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Like literal incest, doesn't know about it, kills himself, Oedipus, but more with his sister.
Great
so.
story, by the way.
So like there's some stuff in Tolkien that gets
Oh, yeah.
on Martin's level.
Absolutely. Though I do think now, were any of the Lord of the Rings rated R? No, they were all PG-13.
No, all
PG-13.
PG-13.
But they could very easily be
If they
R
had
if the studio wanted
shown,
to.
if they had shown a
Well-
lot more of the blood and gore and
The story itself isn't R-rated.
no,
So Tolkien didn't write the story to be dark
No.
fantasy. George R. R. Martin, he wanted it to be
it was
a darker
more real
story.
because war and all those things are never as clean cut as we like to make
Right,
them.
sure.
So Tolkien made it to be for everyone. Martin made it to be mature.
Right.
So if you were just to like slap an R rating on it, you wouldn't be doing the story any justice. You would just be adding in maybe like one detail.
You'd be pulling a Hobbit and you would be adding in a random love story between an elf and a dwarf.
Pretty much. Yeah,
Does that make it better? No.
not so much.
Legolas never runs out of arrows.
Oh my gosh, please
And
don't
then
even,
he did.
don't even talk to me about that one. Okay, anyway, that's off topic.
Definitely.
I'm trying to think of anything else we can touch upon. We talked about the Cthulhu aspect of Martin's religions. I love that aspect of his stuff.
Yeah.
You were about to
I
say.
had a question about, so sometimes in fantasy like games or in other media you'll see like curse the gods or like phrases like that.
Yeah.
Is that something we see in both series? 'Cause thinking back on Lord of the
you
Rings
see it
movies,
in
You
Game of
definitely
Thrones.
see it in Game of Thrones. Like Seven Hells is a very common thing because in the Faith of the Seven, especially, I'm assuming that there's 7 heavens and 7 hells, with kind of like Dante's Inferno. I'm sure where like each
Different
level of their
aspects.
hell is.
so like there's better
worse
levels
or-
of heaven, there's worse levels of hell.
I believe so.
I'm
Is
pretty sure that's
basically-
where he's getting it because he's, like I said, Martin, or like you said, Martin was raised Catholic, so he knows about Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
He knows about the levels of hell and the severity of it.
Great book, by the way.
So I think that he based this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean fantasy. The guy was fantasy. You
I'm
always see
trying
things
to
taken-
remember because obviously you don't see it in the movies.
No, I'm trying to think, and I can't.
I don't believe Tolkien would have the cursing of the gods because for
Like maybe on Morgoth or Sauron's end, if there was ever times where like they spoke specifically and maybe cursed Eru or cursed,
It doesn't only
the
have to be a curse,
Einar.
right? Like for someone, like you'd also do it as
No,
like
I
a
know.
rallying
No,
cry.
and like the elves.
I'm trying to think, but I just-
the elves mention the Valar in the movie. That's the only thing I can think of. They don't like say for the Valar or for this. It's just no.
May XYZ guide us.
No.
if you think about Tolkien being a religious man, forsaking a god is never. It's something that's frowned upon
Right, sure.
in most religions. I don't think he would be trying to promote that
Well,
style.
so what he's trying to say is like in Martin especially, you always have the people who cheer for like their city of origin, like for Winterfell. He's
Oh.
saying like for
Yeah.
for
In the name of-
R'hllor. For
Yeah, they have like
whichever-
the For Gondor
Yeah.
thing. Like
they have that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So there's a lot of like spaces in the series, anyway, the movies, where you see like for this location or for this township or for these people. But I'm trying to think if there's any references to for these gods.
there's
for-
not. They don't do that for gods.
no,
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
hardly.
That, I just can't.
Like
think
if
of
there
it.
is any if there's any instance of it, I cannot think of one.
Because he
Even
only
comics,
has one God,
Right.
and then like
Yeah.
if there's only one religion, you don't have anyone saying for the religion. Because like I said, it's history for them. It's not a religion.
Right.
They wouldn't even consider it a religion because there's only one. If
Yeah.
it's just history to them, they wouldn't even call it a religion.
Like
they would just call it
legitimately. The only things after that are just like minor cults to Morgoth. It talks about and I want to talk more about this for magic, especially because you get into the wizards for Lord of the Rings. You had the 5 wizards. There was Saruman, there was Gandalf, there was Radagast, and then the 2 blue wizards.
I love Radagast.
The 2 blue wizards, it's basically talked about that they went into the far east of Middle-earth, and like some cults maybe sprang up around them, essentially.
Yeah.
Like that's legitimately the only other things I can even think of.
I want to ask a question about that, but then again, it's not really.
I think we should save it for magic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
if it's magic
Because the
related,
wizards, they're their own thing. They're
Exactly.
their own topic.
yeah,
I think
we
that
could talk about wizards and magic for.
Yeah.
I think starting with religion was a great idea, though,
Yeah.
because now we can kind of incorporate how the magic system
No, and
works.
if anything, we can
with
build
it.
that onto this
Yeah.
because then we can combine them a little bit more.
Because you have the history of Lord of the Rings, and then you have like sort of the belief systems around all the different houses that we'll be talking more about when we get into
Absolutely.
other topics, right? So
Absolutely.
we kind of have their beliefs to start with, and then we kind of become into their like own personas and characters, right? How that kind of develops throughout the stories. Yeah. I think it's a solid start, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to cover really quick?
I think that's
'Cause,
great.
We covered a lot of stuff here.
Bounced around, but yeah, there was a lot of info there. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, this was our first episode of Houses and Hobbits. Thank you for joining us. If you watched through all of that, and if you want more, stay tuned. We got plenty more in the works.
Don't forget-
Like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you next time. Probably going to be talking about magic on the next one.
Very, very.
Stay tuned.